Excellent. So yes, once again, welcome everyone. There's a few more people just dripping in. I'm just quickly going to introduce myself and Sustainable Fashion Scotland and why we're here tonight, then give a couple of updates on what we're doing and where we're at, and then just explain the format of tonight and where we'll be hearing from our lovely guest speakers as well. So first of all, I always forget to introduce myself, but my name is Mary and I am the Creative Director at Sustainable Fashion Scotland. I'm one of the founding members. And I'll also here with Lisa tonight. So Lisa, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Lisa and I'm the Operations Director here at Sustainable Fashion Scotland. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. So if you haven't heard of us before, Sustainable Fashion Scotland is a community-led non-profit, and our main mission is to connect the fashion community in Scotland and accelerate collective action for a sustainable fashion transformation. So we're all about connecting and celebrating the community, all the good work that's being done from across the supply and textile value chain. And these spaces like this where we can come together are a really important part of that. So thank you very much for being with us here tonight. A couple of updates on what we're up to. So first of all, we are planning for issue 3 of our community magazine. So we will shortly be inviting contributions for that. And that's all around the theme of the power of place. So keep an eye on our social media, probably next week for that announcement. We're also planning a series of events in March, a kind of spring gathering across the country and online to connect and celebrate the community's inspiring diverse sustainability practice and all the people in that make the magic happen. So if you would be if you would be interested in supporting with the organisation of this, please do get in touch with us after, and we'll put our contact details in the chat as well. We've also started some systems coaching with Collective Leadership for Scotland, which is very exciting because systems change is what we try to weave in through our work, and something I'm very passionate about. And our last update is that we have been having lots of events like this one and discovery workshops with the wider community, people like yourselves, to help plan our strategy for 2023, just to make sure we are definitely being community-led, as we said. And we're currently applying for funding so we can make some of these ideas come to life. So thank you to anyone who's been involved into that and for being here tonight, because that'll help us as well. So that's all from us on the SFS side. Why we are here tonight, we're here for a community call. So again, thanks for being here, very important, you're part of the community. We have 2 amazing guest speakers with us tonight. We'll be hearing from Dr Lynn Wilson and Gilpin as well. First, we're going to hear a short introduction from each of them, just so we know why we're here. And today, the topic we're talking about is how can we support the use of natural fibres in clothing. We're then, after that, going to open up the discussion around what is happening in Scotland with a particular focus on wool and natural fibres, as well as some of the challenges, our ambitions, and some actions we can take together to create change and keep momentum going. So we're very excited to hear from lots of you as well, because I'm aware there's many of you are probably working in this area. So thank you for joining and sharing your time as well. We will send a follow-up email next week with any links and resources. So if you would like to share in the chat, your website, anything you're working on, please do that and we'll follow up with that next week as well. I think that's everything from me. And just as a reminder, we're here till 8:30 officially, but we usually stay on for 20-30 minutes after for a bit more informal chat. So you're very welcome to stay after that time, but we will close at 8:30 for anyone that needs to go. So that's all from me, and I'm now going to pass over to our first guest speaker, which is Lynn Wilson. On to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Mary. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got some. Can you see my full screen yet?
Yeah, we can see your notes.
Okay, cool.
That's great.
So you should just be seeing the full screen any minute now.
I think it's at the end of your slideshow, but we can see it.
Aha. Okay, great. Are we ready? Can we see it now? Yeah.
That looks great.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks so much. So yes, thanks so much for the introduction, Mary, and for being here. And it's so wonderful that Di is with us tonight. I've been such a huge fan for such a long time, and it's so great to have this real this great space to unpack wool, and particularly wool in Scotland. It's an issue that's been concerning me for a long time. And so I'm Dr Lynn Wilson. I'm a qualitative consumer researcher at the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow. And tonight I'm going to share some key insights about consumer lived experience in relation to wool garments, and to look at how consumers experience wool garment use, management, storage, longevity, and disposal. And I hope some of the things that I have to say will be about generating a discussion. So just a quick bit about my background. To put this presentation in context, I'm a multidisciplinary practitioner. You might say a bit of a polymath. I've been working specifically in the field of circular economy textile management for about 10 years, but I've been a designer with wool for about, I think I knitted my first jumper when I was about 10. So I've been working with wool for a long time. And of course, I've been a consumer of wool my whole life. And I worked a lot in industry and government policy and strategy over the last 10 years, trying to implement sustainable clothing strategies with consumers. And that led me to my recent research, went into consumer behaviour and clothing use and disposal. All of my work is framed within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly UN SDG 12, Sustainable Production and Consumption. I'm a member of Consumers International, the United Nations Environment Programme framework for looking at how we're mapping out and documenting how the UN SDGs are being implemented throughout projects globally. But in terms of my research and where I'm at, sometimes in other disciplines other than business management, terms such as user and citizen are used instead of consumer or consumption. But whilst we're all product and service users and practice citizenship, the overarching framework of life is consumption. And a key challenge to reversing consumption is that consumers feel disconnected from the pressing issues of climate change in their daily lived experience. And there's little evidence of industry and consumer collaboration in terms of keeping resources in use. Some new business models are emerging, but progress is limited, and consumer engagement to understand how to motivate and involve consumers is slow. My work seeks to advance knowledge about what consumers are experiencing and what they perceive to be their experience, to understand how to support through the development of industry and government policies and strategies aligned to sustainable citizenship. So in terms of my research in consumption, products are clothing, but as part of Maslow's hierarchy of need, it's a basic human need and right, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, to wear clothing. And I'm interested in the consumer lived experience between the physical, the sensory, and the psychological experience of clothing that leads to decision-making that a garment should continue to be used or disposed of. My research looks at that tipping point and the triggers that lead to clothing circulation or disposal at the micro level of ourselves, and how that transfers into the meso level of family and community, and then enters into the micro-industrial system of clothing circulation and disposal, or fibre valorisation, or landfill. And that's very much, so just go back, that's very much about this relationship between the skin and the garment and what's happening in terms of our sensory experience and physical movement. And I'm interested in this because when we look at the linear process of clothing production that leads to consumption, what we see clearly is that consumers have the sole responsibility for clothing disposal. And so in this sense, the current linear system responsibilizes the consumer. And of course, yes, we wear, we maintain, we store garments prior to disposal, but ultimately we decide where an item of clothing goes next. So whilst we have that responsibility, I don't advocate for responsibilizing consumers. I'm trying to explain that already we have this burden of responsibility. Yet we're not textile experts. Well, some of us are in our training, but as consumers in the main, we're not experts. We have no idea what's contained within the contents of our garments, but we do know what the garment was used for, whether it was laundered before disposal or ultimately the life experience of the owner during wearing of the garment. But this information is all lost and overlooked when the garment is passed on to the next stage, and the consequences can be fatal for clothing circulation, disposal, and the next consumer who accesses this post-consumer garment. For example, when it comes to wool, the most common problem passed on through wool garments is moth larvae, which buries in the wool fibres and can go undetected. Some consumers know how to manage moths to try to eradicate them using various chemical and natural management tools. But research tells us that we're now spending up to 90% of our time indoors. And we know that during the pandemic, this was as much as 100% at times. And this leads up to a build-up of larva feedstock in the form of keratin, hair and skin. And the National Trust, for example, reports that reported a 214% increase in moth larvae infestations in their properties, eating through clothing and home furnishing textiles. And this is related to climate change, which has also been blamed, as well as the evidence, has been related to climate change, but the evidence is lacking as to what's really going on and how we can prevent it. Some people say that it's related to our changing cleaning habits and a build-up of debris in the home that wasn't necessarily how it used to be in historic times. But if consumers, but this manifests in terms of the clothing disposal and circulation process, because consumers might not know that that pinhole in a garment is not just a snag or a wear hole. They may not be aware of the larva within the garment. They then dispose of it through the charity donation system, and the larva then hatches and spreads throughout other natural fibre products. A new consumer purchases the donated wool garment thinking the pinhole just needs a simple repair, take it home and introduce an infestation into their home, which then eats through all of the household carpets at great expense. I know, I was that consumer. Another problem with wool garments for consumers is pilling, usually worse in low grade or very fine wool garments, which again relies on consumer awareness of how to maintain a garment to remove the pilling. Pilling occurs through the proprioceptive movement of consumers and garment working together, causing an abrasion. What we see is that consumers downgrade garments from social wear to work wear to wearing in the home as the pilling becomes a more prominent, unmanageable feature of the garment. Consumers then pass on pilled garments through the disposal system. And if you look with the critical eye of a textile designer, you'll see our charity shops often have pilled garments that are a mix of natural and synthetic fibres. But charity shops are, we're looking, for me, it's about consumers being cheated in terms of the quality of fibre. And this has evolved over 50 years with mixed fibre, a polymer and a cotton or a wool together. And consumers really are not aware of what's in the fibre of their garments, and it creates this abrasion, and it then gets passed on. So what I'm really interested in is consumer education and how we support consumers to understand what is in their clothing, and that because as designers, we take this knowledge for granted, and we know just because we picked up and bought a jumper in the jumper section that it might not contain real wool from sheep, but rather chemical interventions to bluff consumers into believing they're wearing wool. Clothes shopping online or in store can seem overwhelming to consumers if we don't know what we're looking for. Thousands of choices, styles, colours and fibres is confusing, and labels are not consumer friendly. And right now, in the middle of we're in the midst of a global UK recession and a global recession, and the energy crisis, and we can see that people are going to be buying what they think are wool jumpers to keep them warm, and they're actually 100% polymer, and they're actually not going to be that supportive in terms of keeping them warm, but they might create other conditions such as sweating. But then we have consumers who are able to create their own garments, and we call these this proactivity, prolonging the life of clothing and textiles through interventions. In marketing theory, they're referred to prosumers. And traditionally, home knitters have always knitted garments that can be deconstructed, unravelled, and the yarn reknitted into holistic cycles of yarn garment circularity. For example, in the 1980s in Shetland, there were over 2,000 knitters, and today there are less than 200 due to the developments of the oil and gas industry moving into Shetland and creating new economies. Once these skills are lost and no longer taught in schools, it's very difficult to reintroduce them at the industrial scale of critical mass needed to mobilise consumer holistic clothing circularity. Wool is a regenerative fibre. If you have a compost site in your garden, you can decompose bulky, used and deteriorating moth-infested garments. The fibres become soil nutrients. But we all need skills and access to facilities to make all of these systems work. Therefore, my presentation ends with a key question of how we ensure we have an army of prosumers equipped with the mindset to make, use, deconstruct and reuse, not relying on the uncertainty of purchasing garments that they have no idea what they contain. This is the challenge I leave with you today, how we press for policy to support us more as citizens and consumers in how we make our purchasing choices, and how we can encourage skills development to ensure that we all have the ability to manage and produce our own garments for consumption. So thank you very much. Wool is always my preferred choice. So I would say choose wool, it's a fibre for life. Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass over to Di, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her presentation. Thank you.
Hi. Do
Hi,
I need to share my screen?
You can if you would like to, but you can also just speak. That's totally okay.
Oh, great. That's even easier. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Well, gosh, I'm quite thrilled to be here, and I hope I can add lots to this conversation. Thank you, Lynn. That was really so interesting and amazing, and so many things through it that made me sit up and go, oh, like that. So I'll first of all introduce myself, because there's quite a lot of people out there who may not know who I am, and I sometimes don't know who I am either. So I mean, just, you know, throw that in, except to say that I'm a knitter, and I've been passionate about wool for the last 40 years. Well, actually, probably for the last 60 years. I started knitting when I was tiny, and I had a great aunt who really encouraged me to only use wool, and to use the very best quality wool from being tiny. That if you're going to knit something, you need to knit it in the best fibre there is, apart from cashmere, of course. And so we used to go to little knitting shops when I was tiny, and I started knitting. I knitted jumpers for my dollies and teddies, and then for myself, and then for friends, and I knitted through university. And I was passionate, I am passionate still about wool and natural fibres. I would say as passionate as I am about the organic food movement, and just being as conscious as I can about looking after our planet, and taking care in what I buy as a consumer, and what I knit and what I make. I made one jumper in an acrylic yarn when I was at university. It was a hideous process. and it stretched and it was horrible. And I realized very quickly that even working with it was horrible, and it made my hands sweat, and it seemed to give absolutely nothing to the design or the nature of the piece. I have to say that I had it in a basket for about a year, and somebody offered me £20 for it if I finished it, and I literally finished it overnight. It was a massive Fair Isle sweater. Anyway, that aside, 40 years ago next year, I moved to Skye. Following an accident. I was a teacher. I was a history, English, politics teacher. And I had this dreadful event happened, and I had to take 6 months off. So I took my rucksack and my knitting and a wee tent, and I went and explored Skye and ended up finding a beautiful old croft to live in. And from there, because I couldn't find any work teaching, I decided that I would knit. And I started with going to Harris and Lewis and buying Harris tweed, knitting fibre and yarn and plying it up and making garments in it. I would take, as Lynn was saying, I would go to charity shops on the mainland and take out garments and wash the wool and re-knit them into all sorts of interesting things. And eventually I started a wee studio, and from the studio I became a wool shop and a designer, and that took me eventually to move to Fife, where I'm based now. And it, over the years, has brought some incredibly interesting people into my world, into my life. I work a lot in fashion. At the moment, we have just finished a massive project with Paul Smith, creating a hand knit collection. I work with La Fetiche in Glasgow, who are an incredible brand, which some of you may not know about. But April Crichton and Aurélie Forestier have created a brand which works very closely with artisans like myself to make clothes which are sustainable, and each piece is handmade and is for life, basically. So that apart, my feeling is that wool is a sustainable fibre, that it needs to be recognised and used as much as possible. I worked recently on a massive project with the Prince's Foundation, teaching knitting and creating an archive from different specialists in all the different areas of hand knit, from lace knitting, Fair Isle, Sanka, Ganzi. I've written with my partner, Sheila Greenwell, a history and a book on Ganzi knitting, and I've worked on 2 projects in Scotland looking to preserve the Ganzi traditions and to catalogue and curate a massive collection at the Scottish Fisheries Museum in Anstruther. So I'm interested in the tradition of knit, the history of knit, but also taking it into the future. And the thing about knit and wool is that when you knit and use wool, you're clothing, you're creating clothing, and all humans need clothing. And one of the great attributes of wool is that it takes moisture away from the body and it keeps you warm. Yes, it does get moths, and there needs to be a lot of education about moths and how to keep them contained. It's actually not that difficult. People just need to know about it. It's an educational thing, really. A lot of wool I don't wash. I very rarely wash. I'll hang it out on a line and let it blow in the breeze. So it's very easy to maintain. And I think what we have to remember is that 40 odd years ago, the petrochemical companies started a campaign to make us all start wondering whether we should use wool at all, that it wasn't clean, that it gave people allergies. And a lot of that was so that they could create a mass industry from flooring, so that our carpet industry, which was predominantly wool-based, is now tiny. That's all because of misinformation about wool and the qualities of wool. Wool is actually very easy to clean. It's hypoallergenic, and it keeps us warm, whereas something made from plastic does not. As Lynn comments, it makes you sweat, but it actually doesn't keep you warm, which is why I'm wearing a wool jumper now. I have a wool berry that I was going to wear, but actually I'm so warm I've taken it off. The thing about wool is that, and from my perspective, yes, I work with some of the biggest brands in the world and I educate them. I teach people about the longevity of wool, how important it is to have a piece of wool in your wardrobe, something made from wool. But I'm also passionate about teaching and encouraging people to knit themselves, because just about everything I make sure there are patterns available for people to knit it themselves. Yes, you can go and get a garment from a charity shop and you can take it apart if it's wool. You can take it apart and you can rewind it, wash it and re-knit it. And it will go on and on and on. My mother and my aunt taught me that. They did that during the war years, and it is a really sustainable product. One thing that really needs to be addressed in Scotland, in my view, is that we need to have a lot of investment in the processing for wool. We need a lot of support for our sheep farmers. We need a lot of education so that sheep farmers are growing the right sort of sheep. The sort of sheep, for example, like Gotland, which you can clip or pluck twice a year and take a really good amount of excellent quality fibre from them, so that they can have longevity, so that they don't have to be grown to go to meat, that they can actually be grown for their fleece, which I feel is a really important argument that for sustainability. There are certain breeds that really could be introduced and used much more, which are not being brought in and used. And as people are turning away from eating meat, these are options that could be available so that the quality of husbandry remains very high, and that we could be encouraged to eat mutton rather than lamb, which is, you know, in Europe, you would definitely eat mutton rather than lamb. And it's something that is an obsession probably here. We don't need to do that. We can let our sheep live longer. We can take the fleece from them and we can use that and reintroduce carpet making, sustainable mattress making, duvets, a whole range of products and things. Even mulching your garden with sheep fleece is, you know, a great way of using it. So, gosh, I feel like I'm rambling a bit. I feel like I've got 40 years of work in the industry, which I'm very happy for anybody who wants to ask me questions to tap into. And yeah, I'm passionate about wool. I signed a declaration, the Dumfries Declaration for Wool a few years ago, something which Prince Charles instigated, which asked people that grow all over the world, who grow sheep, that they maintain a very high level of husbandry. And I think this is really crucial and important. And I would just like to say about the work in, and I'm not very good at saying this word, de-desertification techniques that are being used by the Lavery Institute in using sheep grazing to actually push back deserts, and by changing the grazing patterns of nomadic shepherds, they are actually allowing the desert to be pushed back through a really radical new approach. So environmentally, I think sheep have got a future and wool has definitely got a future. And I just want to sign off there and say thanks for asking me.
Thank you so much, Di. That was amazing, and we could just listen to you all night. I know that I could listen to you all night, talking about your whole experience over the last 40 years. I hadn't quite realised that you were a teacher before you came to Scotland, and I just want to ask you on that point about, you know, in education, in formal education, in primary schools and secondary schools, we have lost our curriculum of teaching. And so much of what you said was about how you teach in industry, how you teach design, how you teach a wide spectrum of people about knitting skills. What do you think of, and how do you think we can implement it? Do you think it's important to get fibre education and knitting into the curriculum? And
totally. 20 years ago, when I first came to St Andrews, I got involved in a project. It was actually with DC Thomson, and I suggested to them as that we start a golden knitting class for junior schools on a Friday afternoon. And we actually had 200 schools take part at one point. So this was in the golden hour on a Friday afternoon for the upper levels of the primary education. And we started off with 6 children in a small school in St Andrews, Greyfriars. And within 3 weeks, we had the entire P6 and 7 sat around a big table, all doing something with wool. So we took fleece in, we took drop spindles in, we made plaits, we made pom-poms, we started knitting, we introduced the concept of, like, a couple of wee young ones made their own knitting patterns. They made things as gifts, they made things for their family, they made things for themselves. And it was transformative. Partly because when everybody sat round the big table knitting, when people are focused on knit, they tend to forget everything else, and conversations spring up naturally. And the teachers all said that children resolved difficulties amongst themselves, that they tackled maths, they tackled literacy, they tackled even a small child that had such bad psoriasis on his hands that he wouldn't put his hands above the surface of the table. By the end of 2 months, was happily knitting with his hands in view, which is an incredible, you know, achievement. And so, yes, it needs to be thoroughly back in the curriculum. It does everything that a child needs to calm it, you know, at the end of a busy week, to get it to focus, to almost meditate and get into the moment of being there with the wool. It's a natural fibre. And other natural fibres can be used too, if, you know, there is an allergy to maybe lanolin or something like that. But it's in understanding the journey from the growing of the sheep to the making into something we all need. We need to wear clothes. We need to have clothing. It's the most primal, you know, instinct, is to make things that will keep us safe and warm. And like with the Gansey knitting, the fishermen's sweaters, the mothers making, and for their sons or fathers going out on a boat into the ocean, it's the hardest job just about in the world. It's dangerous. There's so much love invested in that, you know, making of a garment that is going to be worn for life. I mean, we have Ganseys in the collection that are 100, 110 years old, at least, with little repairs, with beautiful things knitted into them, you know, initials, little hearts in the gussets. It's, you know, we're talking about an art and a craft which is timeless, which is important for sustainability. And yeah, so it should be in schools, colleges, everywhere.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mary and Elisa, because I think there might be some questions in the chat or someone else in the group might have some questions for you, Diane. Thank you.
That's fine. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, as I said, very happy to keep this space quite open. There are some comments in the chat, so I can also read them out. But Emma, would you like to ask your question if you're happy to speak?
Yeah, I was interested in general about the Prince of Wales projects and his support for the industry, but is the archive online?
Not yet,
Right.
but it is there. And I'm very keen. Obviously, everything has gone slightly on hold because, you know, Prince Charles, who I met in July, is now our king. So whatever happens now to the project, I can assure you those recordings are absolutely safe. And they were incredible. And I would like more recordings to be made and, you know, more people invited to talk about their history, their knowledge, because there's the depth of knowledge out there is incredible, really. You know, there was Hazel Tyndall from Shetland talking about Fair Isle, Elizabeth Johnson from Shetland talking about hand spinning, the very finest Shetland lace yarn to make christening shawls, and her remembering her childhood 70 years ago, and how the village worked, how the families worked in their work with wool, which sustained families. You know, people were paid to knit, as I've been paid to knit for the last 40 years. And can I just say that in my first year, 1984, I sent a collection to Craft Council Scotland so that I could become a member, and it was rejected. And I went down to Edinburgh in our old car, and I went in to meet the director, and I said, please tell me why my collection of Fair Isle and Intarsia and whatever has been rejected. And he said, it's simply economic, Di. There will be no hand knitting in the future. There is no future in hand knitting. It's dead. And having driven back to Skye in floods of tears, I decided that was actually a load of rubbish, and I just kept going. And I would love to have that person there in front of me now, because, you know, there is so much interest in hand knit, there's so much interest in wool, and he was completely wrong. You know, machine knit is a whole other ball game. It is, you know, it's totally different medium. I hope that answers you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got loads of other questions, but one other quick one. Do you think it's a good fund to source the Prince of Wales funding, the Countryside Fund? Because I suppose it's difficult to tell now he's king.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, a lot of the work I did a library of knit, which will be shown in London and hopefully in various arboretums around Britain. And I worked with a group called Knitwise on the project. And although we knitted some of the big principal pieces for the big trees, they worked all the way through all the different techniques that we were training with, including a large group from East London, from the training facility down there for the foundation. So I'm hoping that is actually going to get aired next year properly. But one of the funders for that was not just the Prince's Foundation, it was the Etegi Foundation, which is, there was a fashion label called Joseph in the UK, which was very knit positive. And when Joseph died, his wife, Isabel, created a foundation to support knit and wool and projects to do with that. So she actually stepped in and supported the knit library and is still hoping to do quite a lot more going forward. So if anybody is looking at, who's into knit, wool, approach the Etegi Foundation, because they are very receptive. And, you know, we've been talking about the archive that we're trying to create And they are very, very, very pro creating and keeping that archive, but teaching more people to knit and to come into the industry, you know, the textile knit industry, where there is a future, I do believe, for people. Yeah.
How do you spell the Etegay? Sorry.
E-T-T-E-D-G-U-I.
Brilliant. Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks.
That's great. We can include a link to that in the follow-up email next week as well, just if anyone didn't catch that or in the chat.
Yeah, no, I can send you all those kind of interesting links and whatever. Yeah.
Would anyone else either like to ask a question or share your own story or experience? There's some in the chat, but if you would like to say it out loud, please do as well. You can also raise your hand if you click on reactions at the bottom if you don't want to just jump out, but please feel free to chat away.
I've got a question for the zero waste representative. I went down to Yorkshire to see the shabby makers, or the felters. I'm afraid I'm in upholstery rather than textiles, but I'm using wool for it. So that's maybe a second or a third life for some of the fibres that you guys are using. And the factories in Yorkshire said that they really struggle to get waste wool textiles anymore, that all the old wool coats that used to eventually make their way third hand into bales and go down to them, there just isn't that resource anymore. All the clothes people are throwing away, or the bulk of them, are now unusable textiles. Is that something that Zero Waste Scotland is looking at? Could we act as a supply line for some of that?
Thanks so much, Lucy. So I don't work for Zero Waste Scotland. I used to work for Zero Waste Scotland a long time ago. Now I'm an independent consultant and researcher. So when I did work for Zero Waste Scotland as the textile manager, that was quite a few years ago, and we did look into various issues around this. But the general problem is that over 60% of the clothing that we do wear is polymer based. Right. And so we, in the supply chain to get to the shoddy in Yorkshire with the textile recycling disposal routes, the citizens, consumers aren't donating wool that much. I think it only equates to about 10% of what textile recyclers actually process to get it to the shoddy guys in Yorkshire. And this was my point about charity retail, but not that I want to sort of somehow denigrate charity retail, but when I go in there, it's wool polymer and it's full of pilled garments that are second-hand and are of poor quality. And the thing is that we seem to be, as society, accepting of that this is as good as it gets. And it's almost that because we're not educated anymore in textile and fibre as consumers in the household, we don't really see the challenge of fibre anymore. We don't really see the challenge of pilling or of how quickly a garment degrades or becomes stretched quickly. So yeah, so the whole issue is the fact that in the supply chain, we have this fast clothing cycle that polymer-based fibres are able to facilitate, and then when that gets passed on into the post-consumer recycling, there isn't natural fibre for that shoddy process. So I'm not sure what we, I'm not sure about the way forward for that. I mean, Italy, Prato is still the centre of natural fibre processing in Europe, and they're certainly doing things like recycled second life fibre in terms of reprocessed cashmere, reprocessed natural fibre that they're putting into apparel, and able to prove that it's of the same quality as a virgin fibre. But again, when we're looking at volume, it's just not there. But where we really want to get to is reducing the volume of everything and enabling for everyone to have the same quality of garment. And right now, not everyone can afford access to a pure wool product, and yeah, that's a real challenge.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Lucy.
Thank you very much. Lynn, would you like to? Sorry, that's another Lynn. Would you like to ask your question?
I think that possibly follows on from what Lynn's saying, but also from what Di was saying about encouraging people to knit. From what I've observed, there seems to be a couple of issues with the wool that people are using for knitting, because acrylic wool seems to be in abundance in so many shops. It's considered cheap and it's also considered soft. And one thing that I don't see being addressed when I'm doing a lot of my own research is the itch factor related to wool, because there's a certain avoidance that people either associate it with being itchy, or they really do feel that way and that it's not offering them the softness that acrylic wools do. And I think the affordability and this sensation against the skin are probably two big battles, because even in knitting groups that I've been to, not one person has produced anything with real wool. And so when I've come along with my passion for real wool, it kind of just glaze over. And that's such a novelty when they've got this lovely soft stuff that they're sort of doing for baby jumpers and blankets and so on. And I just wonder how these particular areas could be addressed, because I mean, I don't have the answer, but I just wonder if they're a sort of issue that anybody else has observed.
Lynn, can I just ask you about the price point? Does any of your colleagues, do they talk about the price point, the difference between acrylic wool and pure wool?
They just seem to have this impression that real wool is expensive. Oh yeah, well that's expensive. Or they're saving the real wool stuff for a special project, but you would use the acrylic for your everyday knitting. But it did seem to be the observations I've heard in passing about how it's just considered expensive.
Personally, I think one problem, if I can just say, is that we've lost a lot of spinning mills. And in the past, when we were doing the research on Guernsey knitting, we discovered that a lot of the women knitting would have gone to the mills and bought cones that were discarded or not used or were much cheaper. And they'd have used those, they'd applied them up, they'd have twisted them up, like I did with the Harris wool years ago. And then they could have made something for very little. So we have to address that. There is a huge need for more spinning mills in Scotland. And if there was, that would bring down the cost of wool and make it more affordable. There are a couple of brands. King Cole is one, and what's the other one? There are a couple that do have very reasonable wool products at a really reasonable price. I think a lot of it is in education, because your acrylic garments will not keep their shape and last as long and have the properties that wool has, which I think is really important. There's you know, yes, the itchy thing is a really complex one. We produce a couple of yarns, different yarns. One is our lowland yarn, which is spun in Scotland with very little guard hair fibre in it, so there is no itchiness at all, and it's got a very high micron count. Our other yarn is produced at Uist Wool, which is an amazing spinnery in Grimsay Island, just off Uist, which I helped mentor many years ago now, and I'm just about to start a new project with them. And we, I spun a yarn there, Sorsha, which I put in 20% of fair traded cashmere into, which changes the feel, bounce, gives you the bounce of a traditional fibre, but with the softness that a lot of people want to have going forward. Yes, there is an issue with people, that whole itchy thingy, and I think a lot of that can actually be addressed, and I'd be interested to know what Lucy has to say about this in the washing and early processing of the wool, because there's a definite lack of a place in Scotland where high quality wool can be washed and prepared for spinning. And it's something that the government could really think about supporting and looking at, doing a study into the wool industry here and actually creating facilities for the improvement in the processing of wool, so that we can make use of, you know, the fibres. I mean, there are some like blue-faced Leicester sheep, which are slightly more difficult to keep, but they have, their yarn is not itchy at all. In fact, we made a whole collection in it for Japan. We made 2 collections in it for Japan, and it was considered to be as good as cashmere. So there are fibres out there. A lot of it is about education, about bringing sheep farmers around the table with wool producers and consumers and knitters and companies making things in wool, so that everybody actually starts to sing from the same hymn sheet.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I mean, as I think I mentioned to you, I've just produced a big report for the University of the Arts London on the future of the UK wool sector. Unfortunately, it's their work, and I don't know if there's anyone here from there tonight. There might be, or there might. And that report, yeah, that was my final recommendation, was about getting everyone together. And what I think what I can say is, in doing that 3-month piece of work and interviewing all the stakeholders across the wool industry, including key membership bodies, is that there is a real will there. There is a passion to work together, Di, and I think it is just finding the right space. Somebody needs to take leadership in that, and I think it is about leadership across the spectrum. And it's just, I guess that was my point, to sort of start with the consumer, but really as the producer, as the maker, it's how do we marry all of that together with the farmer, with the land, with the competing demands on land. For example, I can share, I did speak to one farmer in Scotland, for example, and they talked about the competing demands on land, that in his area there was a community buyout which wanted to buy the land to make it a wilderness and to have a tourist element, and that then puts a challenge on the land for sheep farming or other types of farming. So there is a real complexity to, and I'm really interested, Mary, in your next call about a sense of place. I think it was, is it place that you're going to focus on in your next community call, and that relationship between textile and fibre and land and history and heritage that so many people have talked about, heritage in the chat, is so important to unpack. And Di, you do that so well in terms of connecting everything, and we need more of that connection to understand where we've come from, to see where we're going. And it's just leadership is essential.
Is Gail Halverson still on the call? Because if you want to talk about the connection between land use and farmer production, the gap in the early part of processing I'm looking at is the price points. Farmers were shearing for welfare reasons over the last few years. They were being paid so little, it cost more to have the men come out and shear than they were going to get for their fleeces. Yeah. So on the one hand, you're saying wool is a very expensive product and people are preferring acrylic because of the price points. But from the producer's point of view, and I'm sat here on a farm and I'm using wool that my nephews took off the sheep because I might as well have it for free because it's going for compost otherwise. How do we join up the dots? Where is the value going in that chain? Because we can be well-intentioned and talk about what would be lovely and heritage and all the rest of it. But if we're going to build an industry, we need to make it viable.
Yeah, so it's about leadership, Lucy. That's what I found in my whole story, is talking to all the different players, whereas there's no legislation, for example. The legislation is all about farming and agriculture. There is no legislation for wool.
How would legislation make any?
How do we change that?
How would legislation make any difference? I mean, Gail's involved in the land use and the right back to the soil end of the equation. What legislation would make any difference to the current equation?
So for me, it's about that relationship between the farmer and the wool, and the understanding that there is no value in it. Like, there's no value in it for the farmer, just as you said. It costs them, but it's a legal requirement for them to shear the sheep. So how do we change that narrative? How do we change that from a legislative point of view? How do we increase the value of that fleece? How do we give the farmer a better price?
Well, can I just leap in there and say, I think a lot of that in Scotland particularly, and from my kind of reading of it, I think we can go back historically, for example, and look at the clearances and the fact that, you know, a large amount of Scotland had people were replaced with sheep. So I think in the farming context, a lot of crofters, a lot of people that run sheep do not have the regard for them as animals that they have, for example, cows. It's quite simple. And that is, you know, something that needs to be talked about and brought out into the open. And there were huge subsidies for keeping sheep back in the 80s and 90s per head. And where I lived on Skye, I constantly saw dead sheep, sheep just dying because there were too many sheep on the land and not the right sort of sheep, and fleece that you couldn't use. And, you know, people have to reassess sheep, basically. And, you know, the UK had golden years of sheep production, and it could go back to having really good sheep being grown. Not so many, but higher quality, with fleeces that can be taken once or twice a year and the fleece price improved. And, you know, a lot of that is down to demand. And so we need to re-look at our carpet industry, which used to be the fundamental base of wool production in the UK. We need to really go back and try and get a revival within those traditional industries that have been so attacked by large companies and industry, chemical industry. We need to have a conversation about that, and we need to actually change the public's perception of what the qualities of wool are. And certainly Prince Charles and Dumfries House have done a huge amount to do with that. And it's been a big conversation. It needs to get bigger. It needs to actually, you know, be out there. How we do that, you know, like Lynn said, there needs to be leaders, there need to be people that actually bring the conversation to everybody. Because there is a future, I do believe it. And it just needs to get everybody together. Those sheep farmers who have too many sheep, they're not getting enough, they can barely get their sheep shorn, you know. They're trying, you know, they're going back to sheep that don't have fleece that needs shearing. I mean, you know, they're trying to breed sheep now that it'll just fall off when they don't want it. And
the money's in the meat. The money's in the meat, and it's in the head payments and in the grazing payments. And when I was in the factories in Yorkshire, they were very kind. They were so open about the mechanics and the price points of what they were doing. And they took me to see bags of all their different feed stocks. and it was, £1, 70 pence per kilogram for the Turkish wool, whereas the closest the UK suppliers could get was £1.30 by the time it had been driven around the country and collected. So if perhaps we need to choose between advocating use of wool and accepting wool from anywhere in the world, or promoting the use of UK wool, because the only way to change that equation would be to have different trade deals. And at the moment, we're going in the very opposite direction, opening up to Australia and New Zealand. So those price points are going to come in lower. Sorry.
I wanted to ask about the wool board. So one of the bottlenecks clearly is we don't have enough mills any longer that actually process wool into fibre and yarn. But what about the wool board? Is that another sticking point? Because is it not them that set the price of the wool that's sold? And how do we, and just with your report, Lynn, did you actually speak with the wool board? And I wonder what their view on it all is.
So I spoke extensively to the British Wool Marketing Board, now branded as British Wool, and I know that it's hugely controversial, and I know that there are a lot of parties in the wool industry who are not happy with them, but I think there's a lot of challenges around who they are. So they are a farmer-led cooperative organisation, but they have this old legislation that needs to be changed through Parliament that says that farmers must sell their fleece to the Wool Marketing Board. And so what they did was they made sure that the only thing they could do was have that relaxed, so that farmers don't need to sell their fleece to the British wool. So there's no legal requirement, but what British Wool are, or tell me they're trying to do, is just really promote and support farmers to get the best price. And they do work. Maybe Lucy will disagree and she might have a different experience, and it would be interesting to hear that. But I found British Wool to be really positive and passionate about wool farming in the UK, and about understanding that the landscape is changing, that there's a lot more micro wool farmers now, a lot more crofters, a lot more small businesses. We have very few large farms. We have a lot of medium-sized farms. So there's a whole change in landscape of who is who has sheep that need to be supported. So I think that the organisations they definitely want to support, but they're up against it. And this is where we need legislation, and we need to understand the type of legislation we need. Lucy was right, 95% of a farmer's sheep income is from the meat, only 5%, if they're lucky, is from the wool. And so how do we work with that? How do we encourage this market of change? Also, Brexit and the EU, that has the potential to change things because of tariffs on imports coming from other countries, big producers like China. But as Lucy says, we're in the middle of business negotiations, and it's whether that goes for or against farmers. And this is where the British Wool Marketing Board are there to support farmers, but it depends if farmers feel that they want to engage or not. So it is a voluntary, whilst legislation in 1957 meant that farmers must sell their fleece to the board, they have relaxed that. So it's really up to farmers whether they want to engage with British Wool or not. And also, can I just say about Prince Charles and Di, I don't know if, what I didn't understand about the campaign for wool is that it's not actually about British wool. It's about the world, it's about the global wool supply chain, and it's actually really advocating for merino wool, which is not part of the UK supply chain. So I think that it would be really helpful if there was more focus on British wool. Could be helpful for the supply chain.
Yeah, I think the Dumfries thing was certainly about the welfare of sheep worldwide. And as I was saying about the find this so hard, desertification projects were really important because they looked at land management worldwide, and how important the sheep were within that. And I think it was quite a radical, a really important approach. And you know, the research from that can be used to create sustainable grazing in the UK, which ties in with, you know, our future and kind of all of that. So yes, I mean, I'm not a member of Campaign for Wool. I don't know a huge amount about it. The work that I did with the Prince's Foundation was specifically about knitting and knitting skills and the transferring of knowledge about knitting, about working in the industry, about encouraging at the top level fashion designers and the fashion world to look at the sustainability of wool and to use it, and to introduce the whole concept of slow making and slow fashion, and people buying one piece of clothing a year, which may cost a lot, or knitting it themselves, but then becomes a sustainable part of your wardrobe. So we've done so much educational work with some of the big companies, with Nike. We've just started work with Filson, a big American company who we are introducing to Uist Wool to do a very special project. And it's just a re-education that people, you know, about not just buying everything all the time, but looking to buy one special thing which will keep you properly safe and warm and whatever. And the protective qualities of wool, we're really trying to encourage people to see that. So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated, long thing, isn't it, really, thinking about it, but it's fantastic that there've been so many people on this Zoom and voices, you know, talking about what we need to do, because I do believe that we can all get together and create a dialogue and create an industry in the UK. And I agree, yeah, absolutely. We need to be looking at our uplands, our grazing, the welfare of animals, the introduction of better spinning practice and more spinning practice, and yeah, making wool great again.
Just going to jump in quickly. We have gone slightly over time, but I feel like the conversation's just getting good and getting going, so very happy to stay on. But just if anyone does need to jump off, that's totally fine. We are recording this, so we will send it out shortly too. We do have a quick feedback form if you're able to fill that in before you go, but it'll be in the follow-up email too. But very happy to stay, just wanted to say in case anyone wants to go. And also just Di, what you said there, I feel like that was very inspiring, and this obviously is a very complex issue, as most things in sustainable fashion are. But as you said, you know, we have like so many people here, all very passionate in the chat as well, lots of exciting stories and people that are doing good work being shared. Like this is probably one of our busiest call of the year, so there's a lot of passion here, which is amazing to see. And we do have the skills and the knowledge and the passion and the will to work together. Maybe it just needs that coordination and leadership, that systems leadership that you were saying, Lynn. So definitely, I was just thinking about maybe what actions here, everyone, like what people here can maybe take to help move things forward. I don't know if there is a space for future calls on this topic for people to stay in touch, something around that, or what good work is going on right now that we can all get involved with and support. I don't know what that is because I'm not an expert in this at all, but if anyone maybe wants to share, or Di, if you know of anything as well. And Lynn.
There is a symposium happening at the Ducott Studio in Edinburgh on the 19th of January. There's an exhibition on there at the moment, which if anybody is interested to go along is absolutely brilliant. It's called From Chanel to Westwood, and it's a massive exhibition of knit, basically seen through the eyes of different designers and whatever. But the symposium is being led by Glasgow University and their wool and all the work that they've been doing there. So I'd look at the Ducott website. I'll send information, and Professor Lynn Abrahams is leading that discussion on the 19th. And if people want to go along and join in, it'd be really brilliant.
Emma, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I would just, obviously knitwear's a passion. I'm knitting at the moment, and it'd be great to be kept updated, Lynn and Di, because obviously your report, Lynn's, it's going to be used, isn't it? You're going to be taking it forward in some capacity, hopefully, and you know, just either being updated with it, or if you did think there were specific tasks from a sustainable fashion point of view, that'd be amazing to be involved, really.
Yeah, I mean, the report was for the Centre for Circular Design at the University of the Arts London.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to do with it now. I think it's still being read and thought about, and what the next stages are. It was really to inform their work going forward. So unfortunately, I'm hoping that by next summer we'll have produced a paper from the report. But unfortunately, I'm not in a position to share any of the outcomes or any of the information, which is such a shame. I just want to clarify some things in the chat. In terms of the British Wool Marketing Board, the legislation, Charles, is still in place. Legally, a farmer should sell their wool to the Wool Marketing Board. That legislation was relaxed to ensure that they don't need to sell it. But there needs to be a royal decree to make sure that that gets eradicated. And the other thing is, the campaign for wool is an international campaign about all wool. And the other campaign is also international. There is no specific campaign for British wool or UK wool. And so there was somebody in the chat talked about a massive PR and marketing campaign, and I think that's it. And I think all of us as makers, users, wearers, lovers of wool just need to shout about it as much as possible and be our own PR campaign in the absence of anything else. Like you, Lynn, I've got my knitting here from Di's Wool. I really recommend it. It's absolutely amazing to knit with.
Got mine too.
And Mary, this has been so exciting, and I just feel there's so much energy on this call, and I think it's just, we could dedicate a whole section of Sustainable Fashion Scotland purely to knitting and wool. Maybe that's a really great action point for you.
I agree with that, definitely.
I hot-tailed myself home to take this from our knitting club at my studio, and that's been going for 20 years. And we had a fantastic conversation before I came along all of these lines. So one thing that grassroots wise would be great would be if people started setting up knit clubs and getting people active and thinking and involved, because we have quite a lot of young people. I've even got some young American students at the moment at knit club, and they're all really passionate. So we need grassroots support, you know, and talking about wool and getting people knitting with it, you know, at every level, really.
Absolutely. Another good action point there to set up hubs. We can definitely think about how we can support that as well. Jill, would you like to say hello?
Hello, yes. Well, firstly, for those that, and I know a few people on the call, I want to apologise sincerely, because quite a while back now, there was a group of people who met up in Bow House to discuss the idea of Scotland's fibre shed and to form this group. And I sort of had stuck my hands up to volunteer about getting the affiliation sorted. And we have got the affiliation sorted, which has been great. Everything's been taking a bit longer than we anticipated. But we're now actually in the stage, there's 4 of us Janet, who I think was on the call or still is on the call. And there's 4 of us now working out on the admin side of it to set up sort of sharing forums, website, and all things like this, really for the community to have all of these discussions as well. It's still really in its infancy because we're all doing it sort of voluntarily on the side of our jobs. But I mean, if there's folk that are interested and, you know, obviously want to be a part and help drive this forward, I think it's a really good forum for bringing everybody together across all the different disciplines. And so we're working alongside, and my actual day job is with the Scottish Community Climate Action Network. And part of that is also about working with communities and sort of the number of people I've been telling about flax growing and kind of things, and dye plants for their community gardens. And it's another really great way of engaging the communities. And I think there's a lot of parallels here in terms of the education we're trying to put across, but also bringing this very place-based kind of production of textiles back to Scotland. So yeah, so if anybody's interested or want to hear a bit more, then I can easily put my email out if anybody's interested. And yeah, to those who were in the last meeting, sincere apologies for the delay in the update. There is an email that's going to be coming out. I just need to put all the information together. So I haven't forgotten about it. I am doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Still. It's really exciting to hear about fibre sheds. I'm sure maybe we can collaborate and maybe do an event as well and move this forward together. That would be amazing. Yeah. Cassandra, would you like to say hello? Or Cass, sorry.
Reading my name. Yeah, I was just curious if anyone knows of any knitting groups in Glasgow, because I would love to join another one just to even have the motivation to knit on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis, because I need to get back into it. I'm sewing right now, more of a sewer, but yeah, I used to be part of one that met at the Sparkle Horse and like Partick, but yeah, I don't know if anyone knows of any in Glasgow.
I think there are. Ask some of the local wool shops. I mean, there's a couple of really good stores in Glasgow, and I think one runs a festival of yarn now. Is it called the Glasgow School of Yarn?
Yeah, it's not Glasgow School of Art does a knitting thing?
There may be. I mean, I would think that there will definitely be something in Glasgow, and if not, let's ask somebody to start one, because they're great fun. And the only thing I would say with mine, which has gone for so many years, is that we don't charge anybody. People are just free to come along to bring their knitting, and the focus is on knitting.
Yeah.
And we don't, you know, we just make a commitment to be there every week on a Thursday from 5 till 7. And fortunately, there's a couple of people now that help with that, including Sheila, my work partner, Jill Morrison, and various others. They would keep it going forever because it's such an important community thing. And I have to say that people that have come along from my own village recently, who'd only ever used acrylic because they thought that's all they could afford, are now knitting with wool and saying, oh my goodness, the difference is incredible. And yes, I may have to save up a little bit longer, but I love it and I'm now passionate about it. So it's all about transforming people's views. And, you know, that's when you're in a group and everyone's encouraging and supporting people, swapping yarns, you know, helping people out, that can happen. That's the grassroots thing that I was trying to, you know, really try and emphasize how important that is for getting these messages across. Yeah. I'll certainly, yeah, I think Susan is here from the Journal of Yarn, the new amazing magazine. Susan, if you're still listening, maybe that's something you could put into an article about, you know, connecting knitting clubs and opening the discussion about wool into the next issue. That would be just amazing.
I think she's maybe not on the call, but we can message her after this. Or if
she did join early on.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yeah.
maybe we can make a map of all the knitting groups and how to join and where they are.
I think that would be really good. Yeah. Oh, Addie's just put something up there. Addie is a fount of knowledge as well. Thank you, Addie.
Would anyone else like to even share what you're doing? I know there's been lots of activity in the chat. I probably don't have time to read it all out, but if anyone would like to share anything you said in the chat as well. And just someone asked if we can capture these comments, so we'll share the chat in the follow-up email as well, so don't worry about that.
I'll just share what I've put in the chat box there, just about, you know, the Pussy Hat campaign. People are aware of that, with Knit a Pink Hat for when Donald Trump was, you know, we could do an event like that for the sustainable fashion event that we're planning for February, March. It'd be great to have a Scottish-wide knitting event. That's all I'm going to say.
I think that's a very good idea. Yeah. I'll do a knitting pattern.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And we could just, you know, I mean, I would have done a knitting event anyway for the fashion event, but we could sort of just roll it out and get schools involved and stuff.
Yeah, that would be very good to take it into schools. Universities, I mean, there's a lot of knitting groups in universities now, and a lot of young people really interested in knitting. So we need to harness that and really encourage that. So yeah, I think that's, we need to always be thinking about the generations below us, because they are the people that will take these traditions, this knitting, the wool, everything forward in a sustainable way and in a creative, contemporary way. You know, we can't sit back. We need to actually involve as many young people as we can.
Absolutely. Connor, would you like to?
I was actually going to say exactly what you were going to say, Di, about moving on to the next generation, because quite frankly, I was never actually taught how to knit, and I don't think many male people were actually taught to knit either. I don't think any of them were. I don't really know. I don't really know anyone in my town or anyone personally who actually does knit, except for my gran, and she'd only really taught me how to do like the basic scarf stuff, but never really moving on for that. And I don't really know how to crochet either. So I've never really used it in a design context. So I've already just stuck to the basic fabrics like cotton and that. I've never really worked with wool.
So Connor, can I just say, if you can learn to knit a scarf, you have all the tools in your hands, because there is only actually one stitch in knit, and that is the knit stitch. Once you've done the knit stitch, the purl is the knit in reverse. Everything is based around that. So it is actually quite straightforward, and it is, you only require 2 knitting wires, pins, whatever you want to call it, to make anything. You know, a garment, you can knit in the round, you can knit in different directions, you can do fair isle, you can do lace, you can do cable, you can do whatever your heart's desire in knit. So online, there are some fantastic tutorials on YouTube. If not, come to our knit club when you're in Fife.
I'm in North Lanarkshire, so it would be quite a journey to get there.
Well, just try and check out if there's a knit club near you or a knitting shop that you can go in, or grab your granny and say to her, I would like to know a bit more about knit. Because as she...
Connor, I'm in North Lanarkshire, I'll teach you to knit.
We'll see.
Or Connor, there's can you get to Eaglesham?
I don't think I know where that is.
Don't know. Because there's a fantastic shop in Eaglesham called the Orry Mill, which is run by a Danish girl called Tulda. And she is a complete powerhouse. She's fantastic. I'm very passionate about knitting and crochet, and I'm sure she'd be delighted. She's teaching her husband to knit at the moment, and she does YouTube videos. They are hilarious if you have a moment to look at them.
What was it called again? Sorry.
The Ori Mill. I'll put it in the chat. I think I did a little bit earlier, but I'll do it again. Hold on.
That'd be great. We can share that in the follow-up email.
Can I just make a shameless plug for myself? I've designed a bonnet from scratch pattern. I did it a while back and I'm going to produce it. I've been doing it, sort of prototyping it, and it's basically, it's a pattern that's written in a way that takes you right from the start, and at the end you can produce a hat. And it also teaches you then how to read a pattern, because knitting patterns are a blinking nightmare, let's be honest. So I have actually got a bonnet from scratch pattern, and that's the man that you see in the photo. I rushed to this call from knitting with him tonight. So it's a shameless plug, but there is a pattern that I have designed to specifically help a complete novice, and I've also got video snippets online to assist you with it.
Is that available online, Emma, or is it?
It is, but I'm going to produce it as a knit pattern to purchase. So rather than give it to everybody for free, I'm taking it to the next stage now to actually produce it as a commercial thing. But you know, I'm just plugging myself.
That's absolutely fine. We're here to celebrate all the good work that's going on, so that's perfectly fine. I'm happy to promote it when you do sell it. Let us know.
Thank you very much. That would be very appreciated. Thank you.
We are coming up to 9 now, so we'll probably go because I need to have some food. But this has been amazing, and it sounds like we could keep chatting for hours, to be honest. So perhaps we will try and organise another call, or just create space for anyone that would like to, so we can keep the conversation going. I'll maybe let Lynn and Di just say if you want to make any closing comments, but just a huge thank you from us at Sustainable Fashion Scotland. This has been a really nice call to end our year on, but we will be back in the new year. So we do have a newsletter, and we're on social media, mainly Instagram, and if you want to keep up to date, on Facebook as well. So keep an eye out on that for future events. And we do have our magazine that we'll be inviting contributions for in the next week, which is all about place and how that weaves into our work. So I feel like there's been a few stories today that would fit really well into that. So again, keep an eye on our socials for that. But thank you so much, Lynn and Di. If you want to say anything quickly, please feel free as well. But thank you so much for coming and sharing your story too.
Well, can I just say very quickly, because I have to go, because supper's just about to be on the table, and it's been a long day. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Lynn, for suggesting this and everything. And yeah, fantastic conversation, and really, yeah, hope something comes from it. And best wishes to everybody. Thank you, Mari. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was amazing to have this, to have you with us, Di. It's been a fantastic evening. The passion in people involved in knit and wool is it's just so exciting, and I just felt it all night in this space. Just one wee plug from me: in February I will be hosting an event with gallery services on the challenges and how to manage moths and wool products. So that will be with the University of Glasgow, and it'll be online. So it will be another great opportunity to share wisdom, do a bit of learning from the museum services, but also to share wisdom. So Mari and Lisa, thank you so much for providing the space, and to the community, thank you so much for listening. Thanks, and your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon, and take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.